Hi there! Man, I talk with my hands a lot. Welcome to Flip the Script, Silver Bullet Central, Episode 3, The Not Too Basic Switch. My name is Becc Holland. I'm the CEO and handsy talker, founder of Flip the Script. Before we jump in, if you do me a favor, be sure to download the deck on the side of this session and we can go ahead and jump in. There's going to be 4 different sections to this Silver Bullet. Number 1, what is it? Number 2, why would you use it? Number 3, when would you use it? And number 4, we'll finish off with how. So let's go into what is it? So what it is, the not too basic switch, is basically a technique where you call out something that you are currently doing or you're about to do that typically has some kind of negative adverse reaction to the person that you're doing it to prove some kind of self-awareness, diffuse the situation, and basically, TLDR, enable you to do it without coming off scot-free. Is it scot-free or scotch-free? I can never figure it out. So why would you use this principle? Why would this be a really good idea to do with people you don't know? Number 1, it humanizes you to strangers. So if you're calling out something negative that you're about to do, then it typically helps you transition out of that mentality where they see you as a salesperson and you see them as a buyer. So that kind of idea of them seeing you as a salesperson is one of the most dangerous ideas on the planet, because to a salesperson, they can hang up the phone on you. They don't really see you as a person. They can ask you for information that they don't really want. They can basically make you do a proposal. They don't see any kind of connection to you, so they don't feel bad doing some of the things that we do to sellers whenever they're in the buying and selling process. So number 1, the first thing that it does is it humanizes you to strangers. So it makes them see you as a person, so it's much more difficult for them to do any of those previous listed behaviors to you. Number 2, it helps you appear to be self-aware. So someone who's self-aware, it's very, very powerful whenever they are, because you can basically read the mind of of what the person in the room is thinking. So it makes them feel like you're one of them or you're on the side of them as opposed to on the adverse side of a seller. Number 3, it helps diffuse the situation. So buying and selling is tense. Everyone's trying to talk about pricing in a certain way. They're trying to talk about features in a certain way. They're really trying to ultimately get the deal sold. And the buyer, whenever they're approached by someone who's selling, their heart starts something. So I'll give you an example. I went to Nordstrom this weekend and I wanted to do a quick run through to see what was hot in terms of shoes. So I'm a big shoe girl. I absolutely love shopping true to form. And so whenever I go into Nordstrom, I usually want to do some kind of quick run through just to see the types of prints, the types of patterns, the types of things that are moving off the shelves right now, so I can get kind of a feel of where the fashion industry is going. This sounds super nerdy, but it's something that I do all the time. So I usually take a one-time run through of okay, what kinds of shoes are out on the deck right now? And what is the fashion trend for right now? So I know how to base my other clothes based on that. So whenever I was walking in this weekend and I wanted to go see these shoes, there was a salesperson who was just waiting. They were waiting there and they were staring at me, and I'm walking up and my heart starts thumping. And this person's like, "Hey, can I get you anything?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm okay for now. I'm just looking." They probably asked me 2 or 3 times within the span of 60 seconds if they could help me at all. And the entire time that I was looking at these shoes, I was just thinking, man, this poor seller is trying to sell me some kind of shoes, and really I'm just here to see some kind of fashion motif, number 1. But number 2, I started really taking notice of how I felt about that person. I wanted them to go away. I didn't want to talk to them. I didn't want to deal with them. And the reason being is they were going to try and push all of these products on me that I simply didn't want to buy. So whether that's true or not is another story. That's how I was feeling as a buyer. And that's typically how our buyers are feeling about us if we're selling it into them. It's a very high pressure situation. They want to basically make their own decision on their own time where they don't have to let anyone down and they don't have the pressure of having someone in the room who has a quota based on getting them to buy that pair of shoes. So whenever you say the not too basic switch, and we'll get into it, how you can deploy it in a minute, it helps diffuse the situation of, okay, now the buyer doesn't feel so icky, so sold into, so okay, we're on camera here. They feel a little bit more at ease because you just brought some level of self-awareness and humanization to the room so that they feel a little bit easier with you. Number 4, it makes your prospects feel like you don't want to do what you're about to do. So the not too basic switch is used often, or I use it often whenever I have to do something that I don't really want to do. So think about, whenever you walk into, let's say, a Costco, and the person says, like, who's behind the return counter says, like, hey, we actually can't take that item back. And then you say, like, well, why not? Like, I really want to return this item. I haven't used any of it. And they say, well, we have this policy on X, Y, and Z. You can't take it back after 35 days. And you can tell that the person who's telling you this policy doesn't really want to tell you this policy. Like, they actually really agree with you. They want to take back the item. They think that it's fair, but their leadership or their boss or upper management has told them that it's policy that they can't take anything back, at day 35 because it's day 30 is the last minute clip. So you want to enter into that person, of like, okay, you want to enter into the mindset of that person, because essentially you want the person who is buying to realize that you don't want to necessarily do what you're about to do, because then whenever you do it, they realize you're doing it because you have to, not because you really want to and because you think it's necessarily appropriate. So this is a good reason or a good way to do that, of basically, like, a great example is, I got to talk about pricing. I have to talk about pricing, but I don't want to talk about pricing. And so if you say not to be the pushy sales rep, that talks about money up front, or not to, send you a double follow-up email, but X, Y, and Z, it's a great way to diffuse the situation and basically communicate to your prospect that you don't want to do what you are about to do, but you have to do it. Number 5, it associates the blame of that action elsewhere. So it basically associates the blame of, like, okay, this is a very uncomfortable action that I have to go through. I know that I need to send this person a follow-up email, or I know I need to talk about pricing with this person, or I know I need to invoice this person, but I don't really want to. And so you want to make the bad guy someone else that's not in the room, bad guy or girl, someone else that's not in the room. And so this is a great way to do that, of, like, not to foot you with the bill during COVID, that's double the bill that you normally pay, or not to, have to send you over an invoice whenever I know that we are an off-record agreement. But it associates the blame with someone else because that person isn't in the room. So you maintain the relationship intact, but you also get the action done that you need. Number 6, it takes them out of the other car mentality. So what is the other car mentality? I have talked to my dad a lot about how he drives and how he views other drivers. And I noticed that my dad is one of the sweetest guys out there. Like, just would give you the shirt off of his own back, would help you out whenever you're down, would do any kind of action for you, just if it helped you out a little bit. And I noticed that when my dad gets on the road and someone is about to cut him off, he speeds up. He won't let that person come in. So I've asked him, I said, hey, Dad, how do you view other drivers on the road? He said, I view them as my competitors. I'm like, okay, what do you mean by that? And he said, well, I don't want them to box me out or cut me off or, get right in front of me and then turn right. And I'm like, okay, so you speed up and you get in front of that person. Okay, now I've got the image. Let's hit pause for a second. Let's rewind. Let's say you walk up to Chili's and someone walks up at the exact same time as you. What do you do at that point? He said, well, I open the door and I let the person through. And I'm like, okay, why do you do that? And he's like, well, I want to be respectful. I want to be courteous. I want to let the person, go in front of me, etc. I'm like, okay, cool. So let's imagine for a second that those two people are the same person. What's the difference? In one situation, you cut him off or you sped up. In another situation, you let him go through the door. And he said, well, in the second situation, the latter situation, I'm face to face with them and I know who they are. And so it's much harder. I want to treat them with respect because in that case scenario, I can look them in the eye. Or in the other case scenario, the former scenario, when they're in the car, I don't know who they are and I'll never see them again because I don't know who they are. So the other car mentality is basically the mentality that people go into when they are being sold into, and they can do a litany of different things to this seller. They don't know who you are. They don't see you as a real person yet. So they're going to say, go and get that proposal ready for me when they have no intention of buying. Maybe they want a competitive price quote, or they'll say, okay, well, I just have one last question and then I'm ready to sign, when that's not the truth. Or they'll say like, hey, I'm actually running into a meeting, when they're sitting at their desk and they didn't want to talk to you. So you want to get them out of that other car mentality, and the not too basic switch is a great way to do that. Number 7, it allows you to get the answer that you need without all the slime. So if you want to move a deal forward and you want to say not to be the pushy sales rep who's checking in again, who da-da-da-da, but I do need an update on X, Y, and Z, it pushes the slime off but still gets you the action that you need. And then the last one is it helps build emotional rapport with your buyer because you're self-aware enough to know that what you're doing is like quote unquote pushy. So they think like, oh, this person is a real person. They understand how I'm feeling, but they have to get this thing done. So that's why you would use it. Now let's go into when you would use it. Number 1 is, and I don't know if I say this because of personal projecting, full disclosure. Number 1, if you're selling into salespeople, I have had to, for 2 companies now, had to sell into salespeople as an ICP. I'm actually currently really selling into salespeople. So if you're watching this video, it's probably high likelihood that you're either an account executive, BDR, a leader of those 2 departments, sales operations or sales enablement, but TLDR, you're salespeople. So selling into salespeople, you have the luxury of when you do something very, very different, they actually give you some respect back because they know how hard it was to do that. But it is very tough to sell into salespeople because they know exactly what you're doing whenever you're doing it. So if you're using any kind of methodology, and I won't name, all of the in-house methodologies, but it's like if you are doing that methodology, it's probably because you were trained on it. And if you were trained on it, it's probably because the trainer was very well known. And if the trainer is very well known, well, you guessed it. A lot of people know what you're doing. So if you're selling into salespeople, everyone knows when they're being discovered. Everyone knows when they're being asked engaging questions. Everyone knows when they're being challenged. And so the not too basic switch is a good way to use in that situation of not to be the typical rep that, bores you to death with all of my product features, not to run too much discovery on you too early, not to bore you to death with discovery questions, not to X, Y, and Z. It's a good way for you to say like, hey, I know that's what I'm doing and I'm self-aware that also that you know what I'm doing, but I have to do it anyway. So I use this a lot on discovery calls, the not too basic switch a lot on discovery calls, especially if I'm selling into a sales ICP. Number 2, when you have to say something that doesn't feel great. There are things that we have to say, whether that's pricing, whether that's bugs, whether that's SLAs, etc., that we don't really want to say. Nobody's perfect. And so a great way to be able to say those things but you still want to come off self-aware is to use the not too basic switch. And we'll get into how to do that in a second. Please keep saying in the video. But when you have to do something that typically doesn't feel great and that you feel bad about doing, this is a great way to be able to still do it, but also to be come off self-aware. Number 3, when you have to pitch at a conference or an event. Whenever you go to a conference or an event, there is a number of different booths in the vendor hall, and you just have people waiting with their squishy balls or whatever, and they're like ready to pitch you, right? So they've got, their top value props or their top battle cards, their top competitive differentiators, and they've been trained beforehand. And so they go into that booth and they're sitting there ready. And if you're anything like me, you don't like doing it. You don't like someone who's walking by and you're like, hey, can I get a few seconds from you? We're the number 1, whatever, conversation intelligence platform that helps, blah, 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 blah. Like, it just comes off a little cheesy, sleazy, and you're just like every other person in that conference or event hall. So this is a great thing to do in this situation where I say, hey, not to bore you to death with my awesome elevator pitch that I've been practicing for a week, or not to, hammer you with our top competitive differentiators because I know that they're going to help steal your business away from X. But it's a way for you to stand out in a sea of people that look exactly the same and who have all practiced their, competitive differentiators or elevator pitch. But, TLDR, when there's a situation where there's a lot of people who are all doing the same thing, you need to find a way to stand out, and this is a way to do it. Number 4, when cold calling, I use it very, very heavily whenever I'm prospecting into strangers, because this is at a point where you need to build rapport out of thin ice and come off self-aware and human. And it's very, very hard to do unless you're using a tactic like this. And number 5, when you're qualifying someone for budget or authority. This is a brutal thing. If you talk to me or you talk to my boy Keenan out there, BANT is as a qualifying criterion is really, really brutal on the ears whenever you're talking to someone that you don't know. However, once they are in sales cycle, eventually, whenever you've been talking to this person, you do need to uncover, whether there's some serious buyer intent, etc. So whenever you're asking someone, whenever you're talking about something uncomfortable like money or like, are they the final person to sign on the dotted line? This is a great place to diffuse the situation by saying, hey, not to ask you how much cash you have in your piggy bank, or not to try and multi-thread around you and try and get other people in the room. But it basically is a way to call out something that you don't really want to do, that's really, really uncomfortable for you, but you also know that you need to talk about. So how would you use it? So I've given you a number of examples whenever I was just kind of ad hoc going. But here's a number of examples. You can do it in two ways. You can either say not to, or not to be that rep that, and then fill it in with whatever you want. And basically it enables you to go ahead and do that action. So number one, not to run discovery on you here, not to hammer you with questions, not to double call you here. This is a great example of if you've called someone and then you want to call them back for whatever purpose, say not to double call you here. Not to promote our content more than once, not to feature pitch you here, not to ask for a premature promotion here. So I've heard this, my reps have deployed it on me, whenever they're looking for a promotion, they're like, hey, not to go for a promotion too early in the sales or too early in the my tenure here at this company, but I do want to learn X, Y, and Z so that if, later down the road, you do think as a fit as an account executive that you would make the push. But these are just some examples. But basically, the long and the short of it, you can fill in anything in on the back end. Not to rush a decision, not to be too pushy, not to be over aggressive, not to, try and get your money here, not to open up your piggy bank, not to, be the sleazy sales rep that X, Y, and Z. But I think you get the gist. It's basically you can put anything in that back end. The second way that you can do it is you can say, even further tie it to yourself of saying not to be the person that, not to be the rep that, not to be the CSM that, not to be the CSM that only focuses on NPS score, but have you filled out that survey? Not to be, the marketer that only thinks about MQLs regardless of the ROI, but what was our number on that report? Not to, et cetera. So in this, the difference between step 1 and 2 is number 2, you're entering yourself in that actual role. And so you're really further identifying, making them shoot down you as a person versus what you're doing as a technique. So this can be even stronger of not to be the rep that follows up with the any updates email, not to be the rep that immediately talks about all the amazing things our product can do, not to be the rep that pitches you on the spot here. I've been asked at dinner before by a great organization. I'll never forget the director of engineering sales. He said, we are at this dinner where it was very, very obvious that we had brought these people to dinner as prospects to win their business. And so to any decision maker, it's like, oh, if they're a decision maker, they can buy their own dang dinner, to be candid. So it's like they don't really see the value in going to a dinner because it's like, oh, okay, well, I could buy my own dinner and then I don't get pitched. So we're sitting across from one another. I don't know him. He doesn't know me. Very great org. And so we're talking through dinner and, we're talking about random things. And eventually he says, okay, so pitch me. What does your company do? And I said, I'm not going to be the rep that pitches you on the spot. I don't think you're ready. I'm not going to pitch you. And he was like, are you serious? I'm like, 100%. I'm like, I'm just looking in your eyes and I don't think you want to get bored with a pitch right now. Like, you're having dinner. Can you pass the salt? I don't want to sit here and give you all my features. And he's like, no, I kind of want to know what you do. I'm like, no, you don't. Like, we want to enjoy our meal here, et cetera. Can you pass the pepper? And then he was like, no, I really want to know what your product does. And I was like, I don't know. Like, do you? And all of a sudden, this guy is sitting at dinner. I'll never forget this. He was like, you won't tell me what your product does. My CEO is in the room. And I was like, take it up with him. He walks over to my CEO and says, hey, she will not tell me what your product does. And he said, take it up with her. So eventually I said, okay, long and the short of it, we are a blank that helps blank. And he said, I want to buy. So I don't think that this necessarily will help your prospects, buy on the spot. However, it does help pattern interrupt to show them like, you're not the person that wants to be sleazy and sit here and jam your product down their throat all the time. Like, you're just a person who really values your product, and you're someone who, in the right case scenario, if it is a fit for them, you would help them buy the product and like really achieve the goal and executive outcome that they want to achieve from buying your product. But you get the gist. Really, it's a fancy pattern interrupt to help people see you as a real person. And the last one I put here is not to be the person that asks for something before they add value. I use this one a lot of, I'm like, okay, typical girl here who hasn't actually done anything for you yet, but is asking something, but, etc. But you get the gist. It's a way to really pattern interrupt and make them see you as a person. So in summary, I know prospecting is tough and I know it feels hard on the soul sometimes. So I think that we have a real opportunity here to not seem gimmicky, not seem like this typical salesperson, not to, come off as someone who always wants their agenda. And the way that you can do that is by pattern interrupts like this, but by really shattering through the noise by becoming a real person. So that is everything. Thanks so much, everybody, for watching. Not to be the pushy entrepreneur, but if you want to see some other sessions, there are a bunch of different ones on the website where you're currently at. And if you really like this session, be sure to go to Flip the Script on LinkedIn, tag me, Flip the Script, in your top 2 takeaways so I know what you want to hear more of. Either way, I hope you have a great rest of your day.